Or maybe it's okay. So what was I doing? Sorry. Gonna share my screen and share, and I'm going to get my PowerPoint up here. So I wanted to show something because it does, we're going to be, there's just too much to talk about. I'm going to give you, let's go. We're going to go to the Mad Men picnic. No, we're not going to do that now. Okay, sorry. But really, one of the things I wanted to highlight, the Mad Men picnic video is really quite it was one of those times where you're watching Mad Men, and it was already hard to watch in terms of the sexism and the racism and all that stuff. But one of the things that did kind of really resonate with me, they're having, the family's having a picnic, and you know, they all have all their stuff all around them. And then before they get into their car, and they just take their blanket and they throw it, and then they leave all their litter and they get in their car and drive away, and they leave all this litter. And that was one of those ones where you're like, oh my God, that used to be accepted. And thankfully, you know, within one generation, the whole kind of expectation and social norms, I'm not saying littering doesn't happen, obviously it does, but the expectations and the social norms associated with it has changed. And a lot more regulations have come into play to address the waste challenges that we're facing. First of all, it came into the fact that one, this really came onto the radar and the public radar. It also resulted in a lot of community resistance from landfills and where landfills were going to be located. And you got a lot of community calling for addressing our waste challenges. And that created the whole waste management system that we have nowadays, rather than just dumping it all into a landfill. So the blue box system, this is a little bit of the history of the blue box system. It was piloted in East York, Kitchener, and in a military base. This didn't happen that far away ago. It started in the 80s. And it kind of brought together the municipalities in the province working together with the SoftBank folks and all of the industry organizations to create an Ontario-wide blue box program. And it's contributed by the manufacturers of the people who create, or the companies that create the products that end up going into the blue box system. But largely, they have a cap on how much they provide, and then the rest is paid for by municipalities, and as such, all of us. So it's kind of a little bit on the blue box system. There is a revamping of the blue box system taking place actually right now. There's a whole coalition on the blue box system taking place, trying to push more responsibilities onto the producers. There's also efforts taking place at the federal level to ban single-use plastics, which is fantastic, and has to go way beyond just single-use plastics to really reduce the very difficult plastics to recycle in the system. But there's a whole bunch of different kind of histories on this one that you can kind of change the rules. I did want to kind of highlight, at present, we do have some recycling we have a fair amount of recycling in the residential sector, and in larger communities, recycling is still a very big, significant challenge in a smaller communities. And you still have some collection taking place, but we all know that the ability for people to do it is, you got to make it as easy as possible. But there is a recycling system in North American city, or I should say Canadian cities. Should it be? I wonder. I don't think there's some rules in some provinces and territories on the amount of recycling that municipalities have to provide, but certainly in Ontario, there are rules. I think it's any municipality above 5,000 in population has to provide some recycling facilities for their population. One of the things that happened recently, you probably heard, is that China and a lot of Asian countries, a lot of our recycled materials were going over to Asian countries. There were huge contamination issues, and Asian countries changed their contamination requirements, creating a lot of backlog in terms of the recycling market, and because they were processing a lot of our recycling products. In addition, so now that's kind of figure out, like, we got to do better. We've just relying way too much on recycling. And I think people have forgotten that there was 2 other R's that was supposed to go for recycling. So reduce, reuse, recycle. We just ignored the first two R's and just went straight into recycling, and there's consequences for that. And it's not it's the end of the pipe solution. Oh, Christelle, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, why is it that we do ship our recycling overseas? Like, can we not make something of it here?
It simply comes down to costs, and that we absolutely can. It's one, you're kind of thinking that from the perspective, the sheer volume, well, okay, I'll backtrack. Transportation has been so ridiculously cheap that it's been a lot cheaper for us to send that off for somewhere other country, let them process it, and then we buy back the recycled end product from them. And that's largely just because transportation has been so cheap. So it saves on processing and manufacturing and all of that processes. In addition, the probably in many of those countries that we were shipping our recycling products out to would not have as much environmental conditions placed on those recycling facilities. And those recycling facilities do have environmental implications that need to be taken into account. All of those environmental implications and communities that would be impacted by it would add to the cost. Therefore, if you're looking for the cheapest solution and transportation is cheap, your solution is probably going to end up sending it off to some country where labor costs and environmental requirements are far less than they are where you're shipping it from. It's just
but
money.
even like something like with paper, like, is it not worth our while to recycle our own paper instead of cutting down trees? Like, I don't quite,
yeah, you know,
in my brain.
It's mind-blowing that a virgin paper from virgin forests costs less than recycled paper. And it goes back to the externality problem. It all comes back to the externality problem. Costs being pushed onto society in order to reduce the cost associated with products or companies. But that goes to show you how much a role externalities plays in creating the environmental problems that we're trying to solve. And if you address the tragedy of the commons and the externalities, you can reduce the environmental implications that you got to deal with at the end of the pipe. So if we actually counted for the lost forests and accounted for that in the cost, that would be a very different cost. If we brought these contaminations and the plastics pollution around the world into account, it would probably, make it a very more viable solution to deal with it more locally. If there's one thing, maybe COVID might help with regards to our kind of tendency to ship it off to other places. Yes, absolutely, the entire ecosystem. Yeah. Oh, that's another thing I should mention. Inbreeding sweetgrass. There's a whole chapter on the role that the mushroom root system plays as the world, the world wild web, which is how the mushroom ecosystem plays a role in communication across the whole forest floor. It's a fascinating chapter. All right. So I did want to show one of the things that happens with all of the waste that we don't deal with properly, that just gets put into landfills and gets blown all over or put into our riverine systems and then eventually finds its way to the ocean, just like every water eventually kind of finds its way in the water cycle to the oceans. Then what ends up happening is all of these plastics that stay in the ecosystem and do not decompose end up getting caught in the ocean circulation system. And the ocean circulation system, another one of the Earth systems that is been here long before humans and will be here long after humans, is just, again, it's based on the very simple kind of preference for equilibrium between temperatures. So it's, again, based on kind of the physics of it, the thermodynamics. The warmer water wants to move to where the colder water is so it can create more equilibrium in that. that warmer equatorial water will end up kind of going up to the northern parts and creating this the ocean system. This played a huge role in how countries were sending their fleets out into the world and in colonization, because you can see where they would be going based on the ocean currents and the wind currents. So now these are ocean currents, not wind currents. So keep that in mind. But this is easier to to identify because there's more consistency in the ocean systems, far less consistency in the wind systems across the earth. But the ocean systems drive the wind currents as well. So what ended up happening is, let's say the boats are leaving England, they can easily make their way through that kind of going down here, and like you can get caught into the middle part. Let's just say around here, there's kind of areas where there's no currents and no wind. And that's called like the Doldrums. I think that, you know, sailors hate that place because you can sit there forever. And if you don't have water, and you wouldn't have water except for your stores in the ocean, you can die out there sitting there doing nothing. Hand up, but Christelle, go ahead.
Sorry, didn't take it down the last time.
So you can see how this plays out. And when you look at what comes next, you can see exactly where the garbage patches are. See the commonality? So those huge, disgusting garbage patches, and how they play out with the ocean circulation systems. So if we don't deal with our waste and we don't get it out of the environmental system and don't have it covered, like even you think like, oh, it's just going to go to a landfill. Yeah, it's going to go to a landfill. But if that landfill is not covered, wind will throw all that plastic over into the air. It will kind of go into a riverine system at some point in time. Once it gets into a riverine system, it's going to eventually make it to the ocean. When it eventually makes it to the ocean, it's going to go into these ocean circulation systems, and it ain't going to get out of it. It's just going to sit there because it doesn't decompose. And that's one of the reasons why we have these big, huge, disgusting garbage patches. So I've included a bunch of links in the big, disgusting garbage patches story, but it does also speak to our plastics problem. Because even if you had, let's just say, you had a lot of waste making it into the system, if it decomposed, when it made it to the ocean, you'd only have to worry about eutrophication issues. But now you have to worry about the organic matter making it into the ocean, creating eutrophication systems, but you also have to deal with this huge plastics issue that doesn't decompose and gets caught into these ocean circulation systems and concentrates in those areas. And one of the things I think that you kind of think like, oh, well, you know, like, well, you know, why would animals be eating this? If you can think about it from the perspective, like think you're a turtle. Does a plastic bag look that much different from a jellyfish? If you're just drinking water and the plastic pieces are so small, you're going to end up drinking the plastic pieces too. So all of these plastics do decompose, and what they end up decomposing into is smaller friggin' pieces of plastic that are easier to get into the ecosystem and into life forms. So making smaller pieces of plastic doesn't help this at all. In fact, it actually makes it worse. And there are some good, you know, there are some key kind of areas that were, you know, keep progress, but we have a huge issue on our hands. And I do believe we have someone in the groups who's going to come to us and tell us this case study on the ocean patches and what happens. So what's our solution? Well, again, we can't really just always go end of pipe and just deal with our recycling everything. We forgot the hierarchy and we got to get back to it. And that nothing just disappears. Everything has to go somewhere. And really, there's no way in hell we're going to recycle our way out of this. So we need to move back towards a zero waste and circular economy. if it can't fit into the circular economy, it shouldn't be produced and it shouldn't be allowed to be used. It's as simple as that. And that is the direction that we need to move in. And there is progress, obviously not as much progress as we all know there needs to be, but there is progress towards moving towards a circular economy, and nowhere close. We're still at the infancy stages in terms of where we need to go. But if we don't have everything kind of keeping in this circle, and there's some pieces falling out of the circle in terms of products that are not able to be reused in this process, then they shouldn't be allowed to be used. So a little bit of background story. I put some interesting things on what are microplastics, and articles that I thought people are going to be very interested in reading. And I don't want to go into the videos just as now. I'd rather kind of spend a little bit more time going through a little bit of an example of a case study, but we can if you'd like. But this is where I like to kind of like provide you with your own adventure so that you can kind of identify what you're interested in and what you'd like to learn more about. And these are some additional readings. I just wanted to kind of show folks, what does our recycling system here in Canada look like? And so I've kind of highlighted some of the transfer stations, how are the infrastructure set up to address that, the recycling system. Also, a lot more movement taking place in anaerobic digestion, taking the sewage treatment plant from human waste or from agricultural livestock farms, and using that waste product to create a biogas, and then using that biogas to replace fossil fuels. That's an example of a circular economy. I'm going to stop now. I want to talk about, sorry, where's the stop share? All right. I'm sorry, that was a bit depressing on the whole plastics pollution. And while we go into it, I will give you a little bit of a personal kind of suggestion. As you're advancing your kind of all the work that you're going to be doing, advancing social justice, this is not easy work. It is depressing work. It is frustrating work. So you got to find some different strategies for helping you keep your sense of humor, maintain your sense of humor, and whatever you need to do. Everybody's different for what they need to do, but I will give you a little bit of a glimpse. I think one of the things that I think is important to do is you have to care. You have to really, really care and be passionate about the work. But if you also have to take an element of distance, you almost have to kind of think of yourself almost like an anthropologist or an alien that lands on this and think, what an interesting species these humans are, and what choices are they going to make? Because you're only one person, and you can't take responsibility for all of these huge systems that we all function within. You can do your part to help change those systems, to address the weaknesses and errors in those systems, but you can't take it on your own. You're only one person. So you have to almost have a little bit of distance to kind of have this kind of more almost like an anthropologist's perspective on things. So you can care, you really absolutely have to care, but you also have to kind of realize that you're just one person, and humanity as a whole is making these decisions, and you're helping to guide humanity in the direction you want them to go, but you're simply a guide. Your guide, that's all. You can do your part to make the changes, but you can't take responsibility for the system as a whole. And when that doesn't work, when that philosophy doesn't work, my backup plan is to hunt the internet for strange animal friendships. Because when you see those strange animal friendships, you can't help but feel that love is everywhere. So you have to find different strategies. And I would actually really encourage you to have an arsenal of strategies, because not all of them are going to work all of the time. And you're going to have to make your way through different strategies and to get yourself out of those frustration, depression pits. as you advance the work that you want to advance and make the difference that you want to make the difference on. So just a little bit of kind of, that's not being on any test, that's not in the assignment. It's more of a personal kind of how you kind of maintain your humor, your sense of humor, your passion, your commitment over the long term as you advance all the difficult work that you're going to be advancing. Sorry, I was a little bit of a personal tangent. Sorry, go ahead, Fernanda.
Sure. Something interesting that human beings are asked like canvas. Like for example, like I don't know, like 30 years ago, the use of like glass bottles and all that like healthy things were like the standard things, like the criminality. Then goes the industrialization, modern, and the plastic was attractive, and now we're going back to old school. So it's like, it's very interesting to if you analyze that, because we're coming back because we figure out, oh, maybe so much like industrialization or modernity, it was good in a period, but at the end of the day, it caused major problems.
Yeah, like imagine if all the companies that were creating plastics products had to pay for that ocean garbage patch cleanup. Like, do you think that they would be doing the plastics that they're doing now? No. But they're passing those costs on to all of us to deal with.
Yeah. So that's a comment. Like, and now we're going back to, I don't know, the 60s, where like use of glass bottles and everything like eco that were under normality there, like my great grandparents, I guess. We're going back to that, but because we realized we did a mistake.
Yep. Cheap plastic had its consequences. Rebecca.
Hi, yeah. Just like with everything we've been covering the last few weeks and up to now, it's kind of similar to what Fernanda is mentioning, where I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but it's almost like eco-friendly is becoming like a fad, and especially in marketing. So once you put that on a product, it's like, oh my God, I'm like, you kind of don't feel as guilty, but you don't always know the truth behind it. So it's very tricky to maneuver those things, especially with this class too, identifying that one small change is going to create a chain reaction. As we mentioned earlier, with even specifically for climate change, the smallest thing will kind of trigger a whole pattern of things coming along. So in terms of the fad, I don't know how much I believe it. I mean, as long as there's some form of action behind it, sure, but it has become a big marketing scheme. So it's kind of
and maybe one of the things I'm going to add to one of our classes is the sins of greenwashing, how to recognize the sins of greenwashing, and and so I'm going to add that piece into one of the future classes we do. Because yes, there is absolutely ones, they use it for health. It's not only environmental greenwashing. There's a lot of health greenwashing taking place, they'll think like, no cholesterol. And it's like, well, of course there's no cholesterol. It's broccoli. There is no cholesterol in vegetable matter. But you'd be surprised how many times you find that kind of stuff. No cholesterol in vegetable products. And it's like, there was never cholesterol in there. So, you could find a lot of, there's a lot of manufacturers' claims. And that's why that's why government kind of put those regulations in, because a lot of kind of, food manufacturers are putting outrageous health claims on their products. And really, they didn't have the right to do that. And it's confusing for the public. And that's why we want government to do that type of thing. We haven't done as much on the greenwashing aspects and rules as they have done on health, but so that kind of element of it is something that needs to be improved upon. But I'm going to add to one of the classes we do, how to recognize this the sins of greenwashing. We'll do that in there. Should have a ministry just for that, for the greenwashing ministry. I mean, the ministry, right, in Ontario, our Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks is the one who's responsible for the waste management of the province. And it's the one that determines and tells municipalities what they shall and shall not do as part of their waste management strategies. So that's been extremely instrumental. There is, as I was mentioning, the Blue Box program was created in the 1980s. It hasn't been really revamped. I think it's been revamped once since then, but the new revamp is coming into it. They are trying to move towards more producer responsibilities for their products. Again, it is a very challenging conversation. It's one of those examples where you're not always sure which side the government is on, which it should be on the side of municipalities to help them reduce costs and reduce the environmental impacts associated with our waste stream. But they're also, you know, a little bit too much in the hands of the industry on this one too. So it's where a stakeholder group is absolutely essential, that you have a variety of different perspectives, that one stakeholder isn't dominating the decision making and the power in that group. All right, so see it's 5:30 right now, and I did want to kind of go into, first of all, before we go into anything bigger, anything more, I did want to ask, did anybody have any questions on assignment number 2? And the one question I did want to raise with the folks, and I'll put it into the FAQs on it, some folks were asking about what's considered a reliable reference or reference. And I have, and podcasts, and I already mentioned blogs, I would not consider a reliable reference. I'm not saying don't read them to get a different perspectives. You can absolutely read them to help you wrap your brain around those things, but don't put it as something that's considered a reliable reference. The same thing would go for podcasts. Podcasts are still more on the realm of very much audio blogs. And as such, unless they're referencing in the podcast, they might reference a resource, like a reference document. You just use the reference document. Don't bother raising that the podcast doesn't need to be referenced. It's where the information that the podcast is speaking to came from. Avery?
So our group had a question about, so like in the table of contents part, you know, like especially for ones like the W5 framework or something, do we have to address in our bullet points, do we have to address like each single part, or just sort of give a sort of general idea of like how we're addressing that?
If you have already, if you've already gotten as far as addressing each of them individually, by all means, add those into it, because you want to get yourself as close to making all of the points that your case study is going to make. Okay. So I would say that, you know, I don't think you kind of like need to do who, what, where, and then put the point, just the bullets that you're going to want to speak to. Okay. You don't have to put like who, and then you can if you want, if that helps you kind of create the structure that you need. It would help me, because I would do it that way. I'd be like, you know, who, okay, I would write out all the stakeholders that are involved in it. You know, when this was taking place since started this time, it's still in place now, you know, like, so you can use that as your guide to help you do it. But I'm not expecting, I won't take any marks away from anyone who doesn't follow a formal structure of who, what, when, where, why, and how. I just want the points coming through. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Gabe.
There's a certain kind of podcast that is kind of in between podcast and like a journalistic article, like something made by CBC or something. I'm assuming that you put that in a different category than the ones you were talking about. I would put
that in a different category. Yeah. I kind of put that as a news article. It's not an individual. It's gone through some sort of editorial process, you know? Mm-hmm. So I would put those kind of CBC or Guardian podcasts or things like
Right.
that from news outlets in a different category than a blog of an individual. And I would consider those collected, that kind of more media podcast as a reference, whereas I wouldn't consider an individual's podcast as a reference.
Okay, sounds good.
As far as websites, if it's a website for an organization, certainly if it's a government website, if it's a website for any of the stakeholders that are part of it, websites I would consider a reference, but just they're not like, you know, the best reference. And if you only gave me websites, you know, or something like that, I would be disappointed. But if it's one of like a website that's been really helpful to helping you get the case study and the resources, by all means, use it. Rebecca.
Yeah, it's actually me who mentioned that. The reason why I asked is because our case study is a little bit unique. Eco Justice took on our case and took it to court. And there's a page dedicated to that. So I just wanted to make sure that that was something that was appropriate to use.
Yeah, and it's if it's all under eco justice, that like if it's on the environmental justice atlas, I consider that a reference.
I don't think we found it on there, but we were looking for it in the beginning. But when we decided to go forward with it, we just ended up realizing that it was covered, but like it was being taken kind of part.
And I would consider an organization's website as a resource.
Amazing. Thank you.
Christelle?
Yeah, I'm wondering, is it an issue if we go over the amount of references?
Oh, God, no.
Okay.
Yeah, you do as much as you need to those are just guidance things. But if you feel like, let's just say you need more information to do justice to your case study, absolutely.
Okay, it's just because there are different, like, I think I might be able to find 2 or 3 really good, like serious references, like other people's theses and things like that. But then there's like much more sort of news articles and things like that.
And news articles I consider to be, you know, good resources you would use too. You mean, we all know that news outlets have their own take. So you want to, I've always encouraged like looking at things from different perspectives. So you have a more rounded approach of how all the different stakeholders will be looking at this. But so like if you got all of your news from Breitbart, I probably wouldn't be happy.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? And if you do have, just feel free to reach out to me on that one. Let me see if I missed any kind of, yeah. Okay. All right, so we got some things. So is everybody's feeling good on that, on assignment number 2? Yeah. Okay, so since it's 5:36, I can finish off the topics for today, or I can start digging into a case study, but it's a little bit, I can probably might be like, if you think that having another case study example would be better, would be more helpful to you to helping you figure out the assignment number 2, I can do that now. I may not finish it, I might go through it quickly, but we could still do it. Okay, so we're gonna do okay, what's coming up now is we're gonna do an example. I'm going to just share my screen on this. We're gonna do the story of Black Mesa coal mines. And I'm just going to share my screen. Give me a second. So this is just the things. So this is the story of Black Mesa. And it is a coal mine that is on Hopi and Navajo people's land. And it was set up in 1969. It was not done in consent with the community. It was just forced down their throats, which is very common for what happened then, and unfortunately still happens more now, just thankfully not as quite as widely accepted as it was then. It is actually an industrial facility that is on Indigenous land, and it is a coal-fired electricity generating station that is, it also requires a fair amount of water use in an area that is extremely arid. And it has resulted in about the removal of about 12,000 Navajos from their sacred land as a result of its siting. So this is kind of the pieces that this group brought into this. They kind of provided the story, the timeline, the systemic issues, the frameworks, the stakeholders, the different justice dilemmas, the problems to solutions, the unintended consequences, and then the next part of it. So in terms of it, they gave a long, lovely history timeline of the Black Mesa controversy, giving it back to the prehistoric times. Then when the US government surveyed and mapped the areas of the Arizona territory and identified some of the resources that were available to them there. And then what ended up happening is that the powers that be started getting access to the coal mines. And then in 1966, the tribal council, which was John Boyden played a big role in this happening, signed a strip mining lease to pull out some of the coals from the environment, and then to use that coal to actually in an electricity generating station, which sadly does not even provide electricity to the Navajo community. Oh my goodness. So there's some serious issues here with this one. Definitely an environmental justice issue. From the systemic issues, certainly the loss of land that happened to the Hopi and Navajo peoples, the implications in terms of the environmental extraction of the coal, which is a very dirty process and also requires a fair amount of water, which then reduces the water resource allocations to surrounding communities. And then there's also the factor of not only the impacts from the coal relating to the climate change implications, but there's also air pollution implications coming from the coal burning. There's also water pollution air implications from the coal mining and the coal extraction process. But all of this is about how you're using extraction of resources from that land to benefit other stakeholders who are not suffering the environmental consequences associated with that. Provided a lot of the issues with regards to the externality issues, the local legislation not taking into account the cost of rehabilitation, not taking into costs of air pollution and water pollution impacts from it, how the profitability is being shared in terms of certain stakeholders receiving a lot more benefits from the project than others, and also the challenges of thinking about how does this all play out in gross domestic product, and how does all of this, like right now, if you didn't use that coal, as far as they were concerned, that coal was actually of no use to the economy, because if it's just sitting there not being used, as far as they're concerned, it doesn't even exist. Only once you extract it and spend money to extract it and spend money to burn it is when coal is actually going to be contributing to our economy as far as they're concerned. It again is overemphasizing the emphasis on manufactured and financial capital, and undermining or underrepresenting the value of natural capital, or not taking the value of natural capital, the human capital and social capital into consideration. So in terms of the larger, bigger W5 framework of where, why, how, who, when, what, how, all that kind of stuff, you can see how they've handled it here. And keep in mind, there's many ways to handle it. I am not like, you can handle this in many, many different ways. The goal is to tell the story, and how you decide to tell the story is entirely up to you. This is just one framework that you can kind of just, it's very hard to start working from a blank slate. So you want to try and work from who are all the players. So there's the Navajo and Hopi people who are in the local community. There's the company who is extracting the coal. There's the company is also kind of burning the coal in the electricity generating station. There was environmental and human rights advocates who got involved in it. There were lawyers and to the climate plan as well, and how this is all playing out. So who doesn't want it to happen? The mine company, because they were making money off the extraction of coal. And maybe, you know, the question comes into it, the residents who are benefiting from the coal-fired power plant and the electricity generation, and may be apprehensive about paying more because for green energy, because they think coal is a cheap way, but it's only cheap because the externalities have not been taken into consideration. So what changes need to happen, and how do we make it happen? The mines get closed, and that was actually largely closed as a result, and took place in 2005, and closed completely in 2019. The damage from the pollutants are obviously longer lasting, and there's still land reclamation and rehabilitation that needs to take place. The company is not doing as much as it needs to do in terms of that reclamation and rehabilitation. So you can see how they handled their kind of story of what other goals could it achieve if it happens, what are some of the co-benefits of it happening, what are some of the unintended consequences. So right now, you would have thought like, oh, if it's in that local kind of community, there would be a lot of Hopi and Navajo people who are employed as a result of that coal mining and in the electricity generating station. It turns out that that's actually not the case. If that had been the case, there might have been a different situation here. But really, when it comes down to it, there wasn't job creation opportunities for the local community. They had the environmental consequences. There's the push on the to get more to allow the Indigenous people to reclaim their ownership and stewardship of their land. But they can't just, you can't just give them back their land when it's all been polluted like that. There's a responsibility that the company has to do the rehabilitation and reclamation that it needs to do as part of its coal extraction impacts, as well, and the cleanup from the electricity generating station. So when you look at it, this is the who, what's, all that story. One of the things that's also really important from when you're kind of applying it from the Walker environmental justice or the just conservation framework, you don't need to, what I really encourage you to do is don't repeat what your W5 framework has already been able to tell the audience. What you want to do is highlight the additional considerations that came to light when you started thinking about it from the Walker environmental justice framework. So you don't need to replicate it. Each framework and each way you look at it will bring additional kind of insights from it. So that's where the big kind of value of using the different frameworks are, even though I totally agree, it's going to seem very duplicative. It's not, you're going to wonder, why am I applying all these different frameworks? I'm just coming to the same answers. But I really encourage you to do it, you know, because you get some different insights from each of the different frameworks and different ways of looking at things. So you look at it from the justice kind of perspective. You look at it from the perspective of who's benefiting, who's being hurt. Processes, what kind of processes in terms of the decision making is actually kind of taking place? You know, are they actually following the processes? Is it enforced? Is it actually new regulations that's needed, or is it actually enforcement of existing regulations that's needed? Who are some of the stakeholders who really need to be involved, because the people who are most being affected are not being listened to? So I really kind of encourage the different frameworks, because I think it gives you a little bit more insights into different ways of looking at the problem. From the perspective of just conservation, you get a lot more into the fairness and equity associated with decision making and how the process in place actually enhances the equalization of decision making or undermines the equalization of decision making. From the environmental justice kind of perspective, looking at it from the how is this an environmental justice issue and how does it relate to the principles that environmental justice is trying to address. It brings in the social justice element. How is the community being impacted? How is the social capital being undermined within the community? How is the community engaged in decision making? How is the community engaged in problem solving to move away from, if we're lucky enough to get all the stakeholders to recognize there's a problem and now we're moving on to problem and solution. Again, you want to avoid doing the exact same thing that so many others have done, which is like entities from outside come in and tell a community how they're going to solve that problem for them. No, the community needs to be involved in helping to determine what it is exactly that they need. They need help. Don't leave them on their own to figure it all out. That's not fair either. But you also need to make sure that in terms of moving from problem to solution, that there's an equitable distribution of decision making, and those who are most impacted have the ability to consent to the direction and provide their stamp of consent on the direction that the solution is moving towards. So from moving from solutions to problem, one of the examples of how they were suggesting to move from problem to solution was moving away from the use of coal and then instead moving towards green energy as electricity generation, but bringing the local community into the green energy transformation, because we still need electricity. So can we make use of the environment to produce green electricity, and in that way engage the local community in jobs and engage the local community in how this will look and how this will actually serve to achieve the rehabilitation that they need to achieve. In addition, how is the other kind of solution that they were suggesting in this case study was there is responsibilities on the coal-fired power plant and the coal mine to rehabilitate the land. They were just using COVID as a reason for why they couldn't really make as much progress as they needed to make. So that was one of the, again, holding the government to account for ensuring that there's rehabilitation, that the companies provide to the local community and to address the environmental impacts from their operations. So those were the two ones: more pressure on the companies to actually move towards rehabilitation and make progress on it. And the second one was working in energy with the energy developers and advancing a green energy PV installation to generate electricity and then sell that to the customers who were buying the electricity from the coal-fired power plants. And they were looking at it from the kind of perspective, what I really liked here is like the pros and cons. So looking at it from different perspectives and seeing who might be supportive, what might be their issue, who might be not supportive, and what would be their issues, and how would you be able to address them. Then they moved into unintended consequences, and every single solution I've ever seen has always had unintended consequences associated with it. It's hard to know exactly what it's going to be, but having a wide variety of different perspectives and dedicating the time and effort needed to exploring the possible unintended consequences is definitely something that needs to be part of moving from solution to from problem to solution. So they really dug into that one. And then this is the kind of highlighting of their kind of wrap up of the story itself in one slide, and then they went into the stakeholders and the They went into the stakeholders and they went into their role-playing game. But that was the story of the Mesa coal-fired power plant. They focus more on the coal-fired power plant but there's also the strip mining where they were getting the coal, the power plant was getting the coal from. But do you see how these type of model can really help you get a story across in, under 30 minutes with a variety of people who, again, I didn't even know about Coal Mesa when they brought that up. Didn't know, it's brand new, but and I'm not saying I got 100% of the story. I got 70% of the story, maybe 60, 70%, but enough for me to be feeling that I understand the different pieces of the puzzle and that I can engage in a constructive way in kind of the stakeholder group. Case study, did it give you a little bit of ideas? Yeah, okay, good. So I think that there's more case studies that we can go into. I think it's a really effective and engaging way to tell the story. Lacia.
Yeah, I just have a question. So are you kind of recommending that we create our own case study or go along with something that already exists?
No, I would definitely. So the case studies, I think, let me just see where I think we've got all, the groups choose their own case study, the topic that they'd like to dig into. It's something I was giving the guidance on the table of contents as a framework for you to follow to help you guide the storytelling. But you don't have, but you guys have your case studies already.
Right.
And you have a group, Lacia, right?
Yeah, no, I was just kind of curious because I wasn't sure if we were supposed to take examples from an already existing, let's say, situation or.
Oh no, well, a case study would be a real world example. But unfortunately, there's more than enough environmental justice case studies out there that finding one to focus in on is sadly not an issue. Sorry, you gotta laugh.
Okay, so I'm just trying to really understand this assignment because I just kind of want to know if it's us creating the case study or if we're taking reference from one that already exists.
No, you're creating your case study on your topic.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, you choose the topic and then you create your case study to help guide people who haven't done all your research, guide them, bring them up to speed on all the research you've done so that you can get the story across to them in a very short period of time. Gabe.
Sorry, I just want to clear something up that I think might help Lacia. I'm not sure it's exactly what she's asking, but these are cases that exist. I mean, we wouldn't be able to find articles about them, and it's not that we're finding a new environmental disaster no one's discovered before.
No, don't do that.
Yeah, I think maybe that might have been part of the question, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, no, you're looking at environmental justice problems that exist already, and you're kind of doing research on them and then helping to kind of identify solutions as you can move forward. Again, solution interventions. I'm not expecting you to solve the problems like climate change or something like that. You kind of that's why it's really important to keep your scope a little bit more narrow so you can break down the problem a little bit easier, because you want to have a reasonable amount of research you need to do. So that is one of the reasons why I would not kind of encourage you to do research on a topic that's completely and utterly new and emerging, because you won't find as much research available for you to be able to help you wrap your head around that story. You can do it and then highlight the need for the research that needs to take place, and that would be totally legitimate and valuable to do that. And if you want to do that, I would help you to do it. It's a little bit more challenging to do it when you take such a kind of a newer topic or too broad a topic. So I'm going to give a little bit of a hint. So everybody knows the different case studies that you're going to learn all about when we get to the case study presentation time period. So we have group number 1, and that's going to be on Ontario power generation and the fossil fuel phase out. So you're going to learn a lot more on that. Group number 2 is going to be just doing the research on organic waste management and diversion to biogas in Toronto in particular. They're going to look at it from the Ontario context, but Toronto is going to be their scope that they're going to be looking at it. There's group number 3 is going to be talking, learning, researching and sharing the story of Ottawa Piscat. Is that, I think that's got it right. The community and De Beers, which is a mining company for diamonds. I think it's for diamonds, if I remember correctly. And they're going to be talking about that story of the impacts of diamond mining on that community. Their group number 4 is going to do Site C Dam in BC. That's going to be something you're all going to learn about. Group number 5 is going to be talking about blockchain and really kind of like the whole server farms and whether that's a climate champion or a climate villain. So this is a little bit of a different kind of format for this kind of topic than an environmental justice, but this is an example of how an emerging new area is like, we don't have the answer. I don't even know if blockchain is a climate champion or a climate villain. I certainly know it has some villainous aspects in terms of the sheer amount of electricity it requires, and there's environmental impacts associated with the generation of that electricity that need to be taken into account. But it also could, it also plays a huge role in the Internet of Things and smart technology, which can have some really good climate implications. And I don't believe that this group will be able to kind of come up with a clear identification of, is it a climate champion or a climate villain? Because I don't think we probably have enough information just at this point in time for how this all plays out. But they will come to us with the research that's available thus far and bring us up to speed as much as they can bring us up to speed on this topic. But I think it's a really interesting topic, and I'm very curious to see what they come up with. Then we have another group who is going to be doing the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and they're going to be focusing on the North Pacific Ocean. So they're going to be talking about, again, how did this happen? Where is it coming from? The plastics pollution, what's being done with it, who's it's impacting, and who needs to be involved in the solutions of addressing what we do about it and preventing the problems from continuing on in the first place. It's a big topic. They're going to have a, and if you guys have problems with that in terms of scoping it down, just please let me know. But I think it's a good topic and it's doable for a case study. And then we have another one as well for Highway 413 and the Bradford Bypass, which is a highway that the province of Ontario is planning on shoving down Brantford and Western municipalities' throats. Even when they told them that they don't want it. So there's that element of it as well. So that's another case study that we're going to all learn some more about. And that's one of the values of doing these case studies, because it's everybody then learns collectively about everybody's research that they've done. So, and did I miss any chats? Let's see if anything's coming up. Have you assigned presentation dates yet? I have not. I just need to finalize up. There's still 2 more people who are not yet put in a group, but I'm going to be doing that over this weekend, and then I will send an email out to everybody with the time periods, and it's all going to be done at random. I'm not like, it's just pulling dates out of a hat. So, but I will get that to folks by the end of this weekend. All right. So thanks everyone. Sorry I went 1 minute late. I apologize for that. But I hope you found this topic, and I do hope this, like, that you see the connections that the environmental science brings to the environmental justice and how they really do work hand in hand. The science aspects of it are really, really critical, because and messing with the Earth systems as they are things we do at our own peril. And it's just like, you can't fight gravity. You can't mess with the carbon cycle and not have consequences associated with it. It's just the way it is. It's a fact of life, just like gravity. So if you have any further kind of comments or things that we've covered today in the Earth systems that you're particularly interested in, let me know. I love this stuff. This is something I love kind of talking about. So I'm more than happy to kind of put it on to future classes if it's something that you want to dig into more. But otherwise, I will see you all later, and I hope you have a great weekend and a great week, and I will see you next Friday. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.